Welcome to meeting number 84 of the Standing Committee on International Trade. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the standing orders, and therefore members are attending in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application. I'd like to make a few comments for the benefit of the witnesses and the members. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. For those online, please mute yourself when you are not speaking. A reminder that all comments should be addressed through the chair. If any technical issues arise, please inform me immediately, as we may need to suspend in order to deal with any of these issues. And I ask that all participants be careful when handling the earpieces in order to prevent feedback. Today we are meeting for clause-by-clause consideration of Bill C-57, an act to implement the 2023 Free Trade Agreement between Canada and the Ukraine. We have a budget that the committee needs to adopt. Is the committee in agreement to adopt the budget for C-57 in the amount of $3,750? Yes. All those in favor? Yes. Opposed? That's good. It'll balance for sure. I will now welcome the officials who are with us to answer questions we may have during the clause-by-clause consideration. We have from the Canada Border Services Agency, Edith Laflamme, Director, Trade and Anti-Dumping Program, and Marie-Helene Dupont, Senior Counsel. From the Department of Employment and Social Development, we have David Mercier, Deputy Director, Trade and Labor Affairs. From the Department of Finance, Karen LaHaye, Senior Economist, International Trade Policy Division, International Trade and Finance. And from the Department of Foreign Affairs, Trade and Development, Dean Foster, Director, Trade Negotiations, Africa, Americas, Europe, India, and the Middle East. And from Adam Douglas, Senior Counsel and Deputy Director, Investment and Services Law. And Ruben East, Deputy Director, Investment Trade Policy. And Judy Korecki, Deputy Director, Export Controls Policy. So we could ask all kinds of questions of all of you, and I'm sure you could all answer them today. And from the Department of Industry, we have Mehmet Carmen, Senior Policy Analyst, Investment Review Branch. Thank you very much for joining us today. I need now to provide some information to members of the committee with some instructions and a few comments on how the committee will proceed with the clause-by-clause consideration of Bill C-57. As the name indicates, this is an examination of all of the clauses in the order which they appear in the bill. I will call each clause successively, and each clause is subject to debate and a vote. If there are amendments to the clause in question, I will recognize the member proposing it, who may explain it. The amendment will then be open for debate. When no further members wish to intervene, the amendment will be voted on. Amendments will be considered in the order in which they appear in the bill and in the package each member received from the clerk. Members should note that amendments must be submitted in writing to the clerk of the committee in both official languages. The chair will go slowly. I will go slowly to allow all members to follow the proceedings properly. Amendments have been given an alphanumeric number in the top right-hand corner to indicate which party submitted them. There is no need for a seconder to move an amendment. Once moved, you will need unanimous consent to withdraw it. During debate on an amendment, members are permitted to move sub-amendments. These sub-amendments must be submitted in writing. They do not require the approval of the mover of the amendment, and only one sub-amendment may be considered at a time, and that sub-amendment cannot be amended. When a sub-amendment is moved to an amendment, it is voted on first. Then another sub-amendment may be moved, or the committee may consider the main amendment and vote on it. Once every clause has been voted on, the committee will consider and vote on the short title, the title, and the bill itself. If amendments are adopted, an order to reprint the bill may be required so that the House has a proper copy for use at report stage. Finally, the committee will have to order the chair to report the bill to the House. That report contains only the text of adopted amendments as well as an indication of any deleted clauses. All right, so we will start with this process. Mr. Seebeck.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Before we get started on the clause-by-clause review, I actually have a motion that I would like to move that will deal with our consideration of clause-by-clause. I sent a copy of this motion to the clerk, and if the clerk could distribute that now. I am going to make one small change to that motion, and I'm going to read the motion with the change. That all amendments shall be considered in full, regardless of the chair's ruling on admissibility. And I'm going to move that motion because there are a number of what I consider and my colleagues consider to be very important amendments that we are trying to put into this free trade agreement. And I fear that the chair, you are going to rule all of them inadmissible, therefore depriving us of even the opportunity to debate or have these amendments considered. For example, on CPC 1, what I'm trying to do is in the purpose of the free trade agreement, that's the section this would go into, I'm trying to add in strengthen cooperation on energy matters, including the export of Canadian energy to Ukraine. In fact, the Ukrainian ambassador recently said that energy security is an issue that they look forward to having more cooperation on. So this would be a very important addition to this enabling legislation and would allow for this to be part of what Canada's help to Ukraine would be. Also, my amendment talks about strengthening cooperation on matters relating to nuclear technology, including the export of Canadian nuclear equipment, expertise, and uranium to Ukraine. These are things that would be critically important to Ukraine, both currently and, of course, in the rebuilding process. And, Madam Chair, I believe that it would serve the committee well, it would serve the Ukrainian community well, if we were allowed to fulsomely put forward these amendments to the legislation and have those debated so that Canadians know where we stand on these issues. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Mr. Jenius.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to speak briefly to this motion for my colleague as well, and just to acknowledge some of the context for this discussion of Bill C-57. I think reasonable people can disagree on aspects of a trade deal. There's a lot of history in Parliament about constructive debates that have gone back and forth about different trade deals. What we have seen, sadly, is outrageous hyperbole from members of the government trying to say that constructive suggestions or disagreements about aspect of a trade deal is tantamount to not supporting Ukraine, and even going further to say somehow that our opposition to the carbon tax provisions in this bill is somehow supporting Russia. These have been outrageous, offensive, and wrong comments from the government, a government that is increasingly desperate and is trying to use these outlandish accusations to cover for their own general incompetence. Conservatives have put forward many constructive proposals related to supporting Ukraine that government members have rejected. On March 29th of last year, for example, we proposed visa-free travel for people from Ukraine. That was supported by the NDP and the Bloc. It was a motion adopted by a majority of the House, opposed by the Liberals, and never implemented. Members across the way voted against our proposal for visa-free travel for Ukrainians. We put forward a motion at this committee to expand the scope of the bill to include provisions that would facilitate weapons increased weapons exports to Ukraine. Liberal members have opposed our efforts to add amendments that would support increased weapons exports to Ukraine. Last year as well, the Liberals granted a sanctions waiver to Russia, allowing the export of turbines to Russia to facilitate the export of natural gas from Russia to Germany. Bad for Canada's natural gas sector, of course, but also bad for Ukraine. And at the time, this was the Foreign Affairs Committee. The ambassador from Ukraine came before the committee, denounced those permits. So if we go through, the Liberals voting against visa-free travel for Ukraine, the Liberals granting sanctions permits to Russia to allow the export of Russian natural gas to fund the war machine, and just in the last week, Liberals blocking our amendments on on weapons manufacturing. These are clear examples where the Liberals have not sided with what we believe to be the interests of Ukraine. And yet we haven't resorted to the kind of hyperbolic accusations that they have simply over a disagreement about a trade deal. And this shows, frankly, the divisiveness and the desperation of the government, a government that is unwilling to defend their failing energy policy and is desperate for distractions. On the motion specifically, here's why this motion is important. So the process is that committees decide which amendments to consider or not. That's up to the committee to decide. And there are cases, for instance, where the chair may rule something inadmissible, but the committee may decide to consider that anyways. But it's ultimately the speaker, when the bill is tabled in the House, the speaker looks at the version of the bill, and if a member objects to certain amendments because they view those amendments as having been out of scope, then at that point the speaker will make a ruling and can strike out certain amendments. However, that issue only comes up if a member raises it in the House. So I'm calling on all members here today, if you believe that expanding weapons exports to Ukraine is important, I have 6 amendments that would constructively and effectively do that. I would like to move those amendments. I'd like to be able to add those amendments to this bill. Even if they are notionally out of scope, those amendments can proceed as long as no member objects to their inclusion. If in the House at report stage a member rises and objects to the inclusion of those amendments, then the Speaker will rule on their procedural admissibility. But the committee can, as per my colleague's motion, consider those amendments. They can adopt those amendments. Those amendments can proceed in the version of the bill that's referred to the House. And this is not an idle or an abstract consideration. I have before us, and they've been distributed to members, 6 different amendments that would give real effect to the need to get critical lethal weapons into the hands of the Ukrainian army to a greater extent than we have in the past. These amendments would matter. They would actually help Ukraine win the war against Russia. So for all the members that have been hyperbolic in their commentary over the last week, do the right thing. Support these amendments and support this motion that will allow these amendments to go forward, because it is weapons and not a carbon tax. It is these amendments. It is changes that will concretely give life to efforts to get more weapons into Ukrainian hands that will actually have a concrete and meaningful impact on the outcome. So I encourage all colleagues to support this motion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Garrettson, and then Mr. Sidhu.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to correct a couple things that I just heard Mr. Genius mention. First is when he said that the Liberal Party or the government tried to slip a carbon tax into this agreement. Nothing could be further from the truth. There is no carbon tax implementation in this agreement. There is a reference made to the fact that both countries acknowledge the fact that both have carbon pricing mechanisms and will continue to utilize them as they see fit in each country. But what's most important is an actual clause that is in the agreement which says, and I'll read it out so that perhaps my Conservative colleagues can hear it if they haven't read the agreement. It says, "Nothing in this chapter shall be construed to authorize a party to enforce its environmental laws in the territory of the other party." So even if you were worried that there was some form of carbon pricing built into this agreement, it explicitly states that no party with jurisdiction in this agreement has the ability to enforce its own environmental policies in the other territory. So for Mr. Genius and the Conservatives to, generally speaking, be making this claim ad nauseum, which, by the way, they didn't even end up bringing up until there was about a week before the vote, as though they suddenly discovered they're out, is just absolutely untrue. What the member is saying is categorically false. Now, when he made the comment earlier in his intervention where he said that there's hyperbole coming from government members about Conservatives turning their back on Ukraine. I don't personally, and yes, I am one of those people that has been calling Conservatives out on this. I don't hold the fact strictly that they voted against this as my justification for telling Conservatives that they turn their back on Ukraine. I weigh into the calculation the fact that President Zelensky asked us to vote in favor of this. The Ukrainian-Canadian Congress asked us all to vote in favor of this. The Ukrainian-Canadian Congress is now actively, as of this morning, encouraging Canadians to contact their members of parliament to encourage them to vote in favor of this agreement. So when I say that Mr. Genius and other Conservatives have turned their backs on Ukraine, I'm saying that due to the way that they have treated the advice and the call from the President of Ukraine and from the Ukrainian-Canadian Congress and the Ukrainian community throughout this country. It is unfortunate that it is unfortunate for them that their plan to try to very quietly, without giving explanation in advance until a couple days before, they tried to see if they could just slip their vote in without there being much attention being paid to it. Well, the attention is being paid to it now. The good news is Conservatives have an opportunity to change that vote, Madam Speaker, when this committee reports back and it goes back to the House for a final vote. I would encourage them at that point to listen to President Zelensky, to listen to the Ukrainian Congress, and to listen to Ukrainian Canadians, the 2 million plus of them in this country, that are demanding that they vote in favor of this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Sajou.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I do find this outrageous that, again, the Conservatives are using delay tactics. So I suggest that we just go to a vote, Madam Chair.
Okay. Well, thank you, but I do have a list here. I have Mr. Genius, Mr. Seaback, and then I will do a ruling.
I'll be extremely brief because I do want us to get to a vote on this motion. And Mr. Gerritson's comments, though baffling and absurd in many ways, were not on the motion itself. He should take note of the fact that the agreement refers directly to the obligation of parties to promote carbon pricing and measures to mitigate carbon leakage risks, end quote. The fact that, as he correctly points out, the particular environmental laws of one country will not be enforced in another country doesn't take away from the fact that the agreement obliges parties to promote carbon pricing and measures to mitigate carbon leakage risks, end quote. That's in the agreement. That said, let's park the fact that there are different points of view about the carbon tax around this table. My colleague has put forward a motion that would allow us to adopt amendments related to weapons and make it easier for us to adopt amendments related to weapons. So put aside the debate about the carbon tax, and I encourage colleagues, if they're serious about supporting Ukraine, to support my colleague's motion that would allow us to consider and make it easier for us to adopt amendments that would get weapons to Ukraine. Let's work together on the things that I hope we agree on, which is on the weapons issue, by adopting my colleague's motion.
Mr. Seaback, briefly, possible.
I would say that suggesting that Conservatives who have an objection to things like promote carbon pricing and carbon leakage is a far more insidious tool that would mean that you can't have your carbon price so low as to attract investment into your country. So this is exactly what Ukraine does not need. They're going to need investment. But suggesting this is somehow turning backs on Ukraine, the bills here at committee, the bills about to go out of committee and back to the House, this is irrelevant. But there are things that have actually been done by the government that have significantly harmed Ukraine. For example, the export of a gas turbine that was used by Russia to pump gas, which pumping and selling gas funds Putin's war machine. That's actually hurting Ukraine, not a Conservative vote on a trade agreement. There's now a report out that Canadian detonators are finding their way into Russian landmines that are actually being used in the war. Now, I'm not an expert on war because I've never served, but I would suggest that Canadian detonators being in landmines is far more of a betrayal of Ukraine than a Conservative vote, a principled opposition vote in the House of Commons. Thank you, Madam Speaker, Madam Chair.
Very much. Mr. Savard Tremblay, and I will then do a ruling on Mr. Seaback's motion.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Like everybody else, I looked at these proposals for amendments. To be frank, I'm against every one of them. Every one tabled by the Conservatives. In fact, I'm against every single one that was presented. But I think it's really too bad that there's a lack of transparency when it comes to free trade agreements. Every single time we arrive with something that you have to take or leave, and it's almost impossible to make any amendments. So I think it should be, all these amendments should be deemed to be unreceivable. Thank you.
Suspension. To order. Okay, thank you very much. I have consulted with Legislative Council, and under Rule 117, your motion, Mr. Seebeck, would be contrary to the standing orders. As we go through these motions, you will still have an opportunity to speak to them before I rule on each individual motion that is before us.
Sorry, Madam Chair, point of order. Are you're ruling a motion that was already moved and debated to have been retrospectively out of order?
I was being very polite and giving you an opportunity to address the motion that Mr. Seebeck moved. I could have ruled earlier than that because it's contrary to the standing order 117.
Which standing order? 117? What does the standing order say that would suggest that this is contrary to the standing order?
Well, I will ask the clerk to, it's outside the scope of the. So this is the chair's. It's the chair's prerogative to be able to rule on the admissibility, and I'm ruling that it is not.
Sorry, Madam Chair, just a point of order then, to clarify that the motion doesn't dispute your ability to rule on the admissibility. It merely says that the amendments would be considered regardless of that ruling. It doesn't deny your right to consider the admissibility.
And I'm suggesting that it's not admissible. And
Okay,
that
in
we
any
move
event,
on with-
I'm
then we
challenging
move
your
on with
ruling
our
on that,
agenda.
in that respect, Madam Chair, then.
You want to challenge the
Yeah, I
chair? Okay. We will take a vote on whether or not to uphold the chair or not.
So the question is, shall the ruling of the chair be sustained? Mr. Arya? Yes. Madame Fortier?
Oui.
Mr. Miao?
Yes.
Mr. Sidhu?
Yes.
Mr. Sheehan?
Yes.
Mr. Baldinelli? Mr. Genuis?
No.
Monsieur Martel?
No.
Mr. Seeback?
No.
Mr. Savard-Tremblay?
Nope.
Mr. Cannings?
Yes.
Yeas pour 6, nays contre 5. 5.
All right. So we will now continue on. All right. So pursuant to Standing Order 75-1, consideration of Clause 1, which is the short title, is postponed. The chair now calls amendments 2 to 6.
Chair calls question, and then we can say that.
Amendments submitted for clauses 2 to 6. Do we have unanimous consent to group them for the vote?
Yes.
Yes, okay. All those in favor of,
On division.
on division? All those in favor of clauses 2 to 6 on division?
On division, yes.
Carries. Then we have clause 7, CPC 1, in the name of Mr. Seeback. Mr. Seeback, do you want to move that?
Do, yes.
Okay.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I briefly talked about this during our motion to try and allow all of these amendments to be considered. So this is actually in the purpose section of the enabling legislation. Two things. Number one, strengthen cooperation on energy matters, including the export of Canadian energy to Ukraine. As discussed at the committee before, Ukraine sits on the third largest LNG proven reserves in Europe, and finding a way to cooperate with Ukraine on that would do a number of things. One, it would provide Ukraine with energy security. Number two, it would allow for additional exports of LNG to Europe, which would, of course, have the effect of defunding Vladimir Putin's war machine. So this would be a very useful thing to have included not only in the enabling legislation, but, of course, in the free trade agreement itself. There are things that are hurtful, I think, in this trade agreement. There are things that could be helpful. That's one of them. The other issue, of course, is strengthen cooperation on matters relating to nuclear technology, including the export of Canadian nuclear equipment, expertise, and uranium to Ukraine. Again, energy security is a very critical issue for Ukraine. They've lost 40% of their electrical generating capacity in the course of the war. Both Canada and Ukraine have a proud history of nuclear technology. Canada could absolutely help Ukraine in further developing its electricity generation capacity through nuclear technology. Ukraine actually used to be an exporter of electricity to Europe. So again, this would be a net benefit to Ukraine. They would have increased energy exports, which would be revenue for the government in the middle of a war. And those electricity exports would further reduce the reliance on Russian gas in Europe, thereby defunding Putin's war machine. These amendments are very strong, purposeful amendments, helpful for Ukraine, and I would hope that all members of the committee would support them.
Thank you very much, Mr. Seeback. I now will rule on the admissibility of that. So Bill C-57, the role of C-57 seeks to enact the Act to implement the 2023 Free Trade Agreement between Canada and Ukraine. Clause 7 of the bill states that the purpose of the Act is to implement the agreement, and it provides a summary list of the objectives that are elaborated through its provisions. The amendment seeks to add to that list 2 additional objectives. The first is to strengthen cooperation on energy matters, which would include the export of Canadian energy to Ukraine, and the second is to strengthen cooperation on matters relating to nuclear technology, which would include the export of Canadian nuclear equipment, expertise, and uranium to Ukraine, and which is an amendment to a bill that was referred to committee after second reading, is out of order, as it is beyond the scope and the principle of the bill. So in the opinion of the chair, the addition of the aforementioned objectives would create new concepts that are beyond the scope of the bill. Therefore, I rule the amendment inadmissible.
Madam Chair, I'm going to challenge that ruling. The Ukrainian ambassador actually very clearly said energy security is an issue they want to work on with Canada recently.
Okay, then we will.
So I'd like to challenge the ruling.
All right. Okay, Madam Clerk. There's been a challenge to my ruling, so we will have to vote on that.
Mr. Arya.
For those who
Sustaining
want-
the ruling?
This is to support the
Yes.
ruling of the chair
Yes.
that the proposed amendment by Mr. Seeback is out of order.
Madame Fortier.
Sustain, oui.
Mr. Miao. Mr. Sidhu. Mr. Sheehan.
In favor of the chair.
Mr. Baldinelli. No. Mr. Genuis.
No.
Monsieur Martel. No. Mr. Seeback.
No.
Monsieur Savard-Tremblay.
Non, mais tout en étant opposé à la proposition.
Mr. Cannings.
Yes.
Yeas
you.
pour 6, nays contre 5.
Thank you very much. All right, shall Clause 7 carry on division? Okay. Now, there are no amendments submitted to Clauses 8 to 15. Do we have unanimous consent to group 8 to 15 for the vote? Yes. We do, thank you very much. So shall Clauses 8 to 15 carry? All those in favor? On division. Carried. All right. Okay, we have a new clause from the block member. Did you want to speak to that, Mr. Savard-Tremblay?
Oui, bien écoutez, très brièvement, comme on
Yes, very briefly. As we learned in the testimony, there's a section on corporate responsibility. We know that there's a corruption problem in Ukraine, so we're not pointing the finger. We know that they're working on things, but it's important to strengthen transparency and control mechanisms when it comes to our Canadian companies and what could occur in foreign countries. So the idea here is to set up a working group to work on these issues.
Mr. Savard-Tremblay, Mr. Seeback.
Well, I certainly,
Mr. Seeback speaks. I do need to inform you that I will be ruling it inadmissible, and I will read out the reason that it's inadmissible. Bill C-57 seeks to enact the act and to implement the 2023 Free Trade Agreement between Canada and Ukraine. The amendment proposes, among other things, the appointment of a group of experts responsible for ensuring that Canadian companies operating in Ukraine comply with the principles and guidelines referred to in Section 15.14 of the agreement. As the House of Commons Procedure and Practice, 3rd edition, states on page 772, since an amendment may not infringe upon the financial initiative of the Crown, it is inadmissible if it imposes a charge on the public treasury, or if it extends the objects or purposes or relaxes the conditions and qualifications specified in the royal recommendation. It is in my opinion that the amendment proposes a new entity which would impose a new charge on the public treasury. Therefore, I rule the amendment inadmissible.
À mon tour, Madame la Présidente, de remettre.
And now it's my turn to respectfully and politely challenge your decision.
I have never had so many challenges as I'm getting today. All right. Madam Chair, please proceed.
So shall the ruling of the chair be sustained?
Yes.
Mr. Arya. Madame Fortier.
Oui.
Mr. Miao.
Yes.
Mr. Sidhu. Yes. Mr. Sheehan.
In favor of the chair.
Mr. Baldinelli.
No.
Mr. Genuis.
No.
Monsieur Martel.
No.
Mr. Seeback.
no.
Monsieur Savard-Tremblay.
Non.
Mr. Cannings.
Yes.
Yeas pour 6, nays contre 5.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, we are now on to CPC 2. Is it Mr. Genius or Mr. Seeback? I'm not sure. Mr. Genius.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm optimistic that you'll make the right decision this time. This is an important amendment that would seek to give effect to the desire of many Canadians to allow Ukraine to have access to the weapons that it needs to effectively prosecute its war against the illegal genocidal invasion of the Putin regime. This would add the following new clause 15.1, that within 30 days after the day on which this section comes into force, the Minister of Public Works and Government Services must prepare a detailed plan to increase production in Canada of defence supplies as defined in Section 2 of the Defence Production Act, particularly defence supplies required by the Ukrainian Armed Forces or the Canadian Forces. And 2, that the Minister of Public Works and Government Services must publish the plan or give notice of its availability in Part 1 of the Canada Gazette and in other appropriate manner that the Minister, in any other manner that the Minister considers appropriate. So the effect of this would be to require the government to develop a plan and to report on that plan to increase defense production. This is very important because in increasingly fraught and challenging times globally, which include the war in Ukraine, we need to have the munitions, the military supplies that we need to defend ourselves, and Ukraine is in vital need of those supplies. Getting to where we need to be on this requires a plan around defense production. And industry requires certainty and clarity from the government about what that demand is going to be over the long term. There have been messages sent to industry by the government about what the needs may be, but this kind of certainty and predictability that would be associated with the detailed plan that we're calling for, it would help Ukraine and it would also help Canada because it would provide industry with the certainty they need to make investments in production that are going to meet Ukraine's needs and Canada's needs over the long term. So this is a good amendment that responds to a vital need, that is for Ukraine to have the munitions it requires and for the government to lay out a plan in advance that would facilitate the increase in defense production in Canada that would get us towards that objective. This is a common sense amendment that I don't think anybody should oppose. So I hope that we'll have the agreement of the committee to allow the amendment to proceed and for the amendment to be adopted. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I am going to suspend the meeting for a couple of minutes while I ensure that I have consulted with Legislative Council. So I will move suspension. I have consulted with Legislative Counsel, and I will make the following ruling. Bill C-57 seeks to enact the Act to implement the 2023 Free Trade Agreement between Canada and the Ukraine. The amendment seeks to mandate the preparation of a plan to increase Canadian production of defense supplies required by the Ukrainian Armed Forces or the Canadian Forces. As House of Commons Procedure and Practice dictates, 3rd edition on page 770, an amendment to a bill that was referred to committee after the second reading is out of order if it is beyond the scope and the principle of the bill. In the opinion that has been well thought out, I say that the aforementioned plan contains a new concept that is beyond the scope of the bill. Therefore, unfortunately, I will rule that the amendment is inadmissible.
Thank you, Madam Chair. With great deference for your office, but taking into consideration what may be some reluctance to rule it out of the order, I will do us all a favor and challenge the ruling so that the amendment can be allowed if members are willing.
Right. Okay.
So shall the
Madam Chair?
ruling of the chair be sustained? Mr. Arya?
Yes.
Madame Fortier? Oui. Mr. Miao?
Yes.
Mr. Sidhu?
Yes.
Mr. Sheehan?
In favor of the chair.
Mr. Baldinelli?
No.
Mr. Genuis?
No.
Monsieur Martel? Mr. Sipak?
No.
Monsieur Savard-Tremblay?
Non, mais tout en étant contre la proposition.
Yes.
Yeas pour 6, nays contre 5.
Okay. All right, I now have CPC 3. Does the member want to move it?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So this introduces a new clause regarding the donation of surplus military equipment to Ukraine. It says that for as long as any territory of Ukraine is occupied by the armed forces of the Russian Federation, the Minister of National Defense must periodically review Canada's inventory of military equipment and offer to donate to Ukraine any military equipment that minister deems to be surplus or no longer useful to Canada. Madam Chair, simple and straightforward. If we have military equipment that is no longer useful to Canada and would be useful to Ukraine in their existential struggle for the defense of their territory and their people, we should be providing that equipment. And Conservatives have been consistently advocating on this issue in the past, in instances where we would have an opportunity to revitalize our own stockpile by purchasing new state-of-the-art equipment for our military and sharing older equipment that likely we would not use, but that could be used by the Ukrainians right now, sharing that equipment with Ukraine. Better that it be used in the battlefield, defending Ukraine's people and its territory, than gather dust in a context where it is very likely to not be used here in Canada. The amendment is not highly prescriptive. It simply says that the Minister of National Defense should periodically take a look at our stockpiles, at our inventory, and make an assessment about what can be contributed. I think this is helpful. This is constructive. This would make a difference. This would make a real concrete difference for Ukraine and its defense of its territory and its people. So I hope that this amendment will find the support of members. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. I will do the ruling now. Bill C-57 seeks to enact the Act to implement the 2023 Free Trade Agreement between Canada and Ukraine. The amendment proposes that the Minister of National Defense donate to Ukraine any Canadian military equipment that is deemed to be a surplus or no longer useful to Canada. As the House of Commons Procedure and Practice, 3rd edition, states on page 770, that an amendment to a bill that was referred to committee after second reading is out of order if it is beyond the scope and principle of the bill. In my opinion, donation of Canadian military equipment represents a new concept beyond the scope of the bill. Therefore, I rule the amendment inadmissible.
All right. Well, let's challenge the challenge the chair then.
You want to challenge the chair, Mr.
I do,
Jennings?
yes, I do.
Absolutely surprising. Madam Clerk?
Shall the ruling,
I took a suspension to think about it and make sure that there wasn't any way, and made my ruling.
shall the ruling of the chair be sustained? Mr. Arya?
Yes.
Madame Fortier? Oui. Mr. Miao?
Yes.
Mr. Sidhu?
Yes.
Mr. Sheehan?
Yes.
Mr. Baldinelli?
No.
Mr. Genuis?
No.
Monsieur Martel?
No.
Mr. Seaback?
No.
Monsieur Savard-Tremblay?
Non, mais contre la proposition.
Mr. Kennings?
Yes,
Mr. Kennings?
but I agree with Monsieur Savard-Tremblay.
Yeas pour 6, nays contre 5.
Okay, we will move on now. Okay, we have another proposed amendment from the block. Mr. Savard-Tremblay, do you want to move that amendment?
Oui, absolument. Ben, écoute,
Absolutely. I think the amendment is quite clear. It's close to my previous amendment that was rejected, but this one has no impact on finances. It doesn't require any funds. It requires that the minister ensure that enterprises in Canada operating in Ukraine comply with the principles and guidelines referred to in Article 1514 of the agreement.
Any of the members wish to speak to the motion by Mr. Savard-Tremblay? It is admissible. Okay, Ms. Fortier.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Knowing that it is admissible allows us to see that we do support the amendment, and we are completely in agreement with the amendment. We're comfortable with it.
Debate, discussion, if not, all those in, oh, sorry, Mr. Seaback.
So there's already a robust dispute resolution section in Section 28 of the agreement. In fact, there's a whole subsection that deals with these types of matters. So I don't see that we need to add this into the agreement, and Conservatives don't support this amendment.
Thank you. Mr. Tremblay.
moi, juste un ajout rapide sur le.
Just a quick thing when it comes to that section, there's just a reference to corporate responsibility on a voluntary basis. There's nothing that is set out in stone. So the idea here is to have principles that are more binding.
Block 2 carry. On division? Okay, carry. Right.
Pass it on division.
Thank you. Very much appreciated. Shall clause 16 carry? Can I get some, shall clause 16 carry? On division. Okay, we now have a new clause, CPC 4. Is there a member that wants to move it?
Thank you, Madam Chair. This amendment that we're proposing deals with the issue of export permits. It says that despite subsection 2, any type of it amends the Export and Import Permits Act, and it says that despite subsection 2, any type of munition that is intended for export to the United States and that is excluded from the export control list shall not be excluded on the export control list if it is intended for export to Ukraine, and for as long as any permit issued under subsection 1.1 to export any type of munition to the United States is enforced, the export of the same type of munition to Ukraine is also permitted, subject to the terms and conditions described in that permit. Essentially, this amendment would streamline the rules around munitions, around export permits for weapons and munitions intended for Ukraine by applying the same standard of review that is applied in the case of the United States. There are various provisions that regulate export permits for munitions, and there is some variation in the standard of review that's involved, depending on the country in question. Ukraine is an important ally. We want to see weapons delivered as quickly as possible. And this is why we think applying the review standard for Ukraine that is associated with most other NATO partners is sensible and reasonable. That the review standard could be applied to Ukraine that is applied to our other partners, and that this would have the effect of significantly streamlining that review process and allowing weapons and munitions in general to be delivered to Ukraine more quickly. Again, this amendment would have concrete effect for the brave women and men on the front lines fighting the illegal genocidal invasion by Russia. So I hope that members will be supportive of this amendment proceeding through the process. And just if I can, in the context of speaking to this amendment, remind members of the processes around amendments, that if the committee chooses to adopt this amendment, we can also seek the concurrence of the House to accept it, even if it goes beyond the formal parameters of scope. And I've been involved in legislative reviews in the past where committees have decided that expansions of scope are necessary and important, and have sent requests to the House to expand the scope. Motions have been adopted in the House, or there's simply been unanimous consent at report stage. I recall the work that was done in Bill C-41, for example. We agreed on certain amendments that did, formally speaking, go beyond the scope of the bill at second reading, and therefore there was unanimous consent at the report stage to allow those amendments to go through. So we have all the tools available to us to adopt these amendments. There is no fundamental impediment to us adopting this or any other amendment that we wish to adopt, provided that there's a will to do so. Sadly, what we've seen so far is that there hasn't been a will to adopt these important amendments that support weapons exports. We had motions last week from Conservative members that would have allowed these amendments to be deemed necessarily in scope. We tried to put those motions forward to make the process easier. Liberals and New Democrats opposed those motions. Today, we're again seeing opposition to our efforts to adopt these important amendments. But it is important to underline and get on the record that if the committee wanted to move forward with these amendments, we could. The only reason we're not, in most cases it seems, moving forward with them is because Liberals and New Democrats are voting against our efforts to move those forward. So I hope that on this amendment, common sense amendment to get munitions to our allies in Ukraine more quickly, we'll see more support from colleagues around the table. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I will do the ruling, and let me just assure members that, and anyone who is watching, the House of Commons has very strict rules of what can be done and what can't be done. And as the chair, it is imperative that I follow the rules that are set down for all committee chairs and all committees. So, Amendment CPC 4 seeks to amend Sections 3 and 7 of the Export and Import Permits Act. As House of Commons Procedure and Practice 3rd edition states on page 771, an amendment is inadmissible if it proposes to amend a statute that is not before the committee or a section of the parent act unless the latter is specifically amended by a clause of the bill. Since Sections 3 and 7 of the Export and Import Permits Act are not being amended by Bill C-57, it is therefore my opinion that the amendment is inadmissible. Thank you very much. Of course. Madam Chair?
Mr.
Madam
Arya?
Clerk?
Shall the ruling of the chair be sustained?
Yes.
Madame Fortier? Oui. Mr. Miao?
Yes.
Mr. Sidhu?
Yes.
Mr. Sheehan?
Yes.
Mr. Baldinelli?
No.
Mr. Genuis?
No.
Monsieur Martel?
No.
Mr. Seaback?
No.
Monsieur Savard-Tremblay?
Non, mais la suite. Là.
Mr. Cannings?
Yes.
Yeas pour 6, nays contre 5.
Thank you very much. Okay, next we have CPC 5. Ask if the member would like to move it.
I would. Madam Chair, thank you. CPC 5 is similar to the previous amendment. It amends the Export-Import Permits Act by saying that for as long as any permit issued under subsection 2 is in force to broker any type of munition that is to be imported into any country specified in the permit for end use in that country, brokering the type of munition specified in that permit that are to be imported into Ukraine for end use in Ukraine is also permitted, subject to the terms and conditions specified in that permit. So the effect of this is, for those less familiar with the arms export process, there are so-called open policy countries that are designated for having a more streamlined review process for the export of weapons. And open policy countries are most of our NATO allies, as well as our Five Eyes partners, and I believe South Korea is on that list as well. So there's it's most of our NATO partners, as well as some of our Asia Pacific partners that are already on that list, subject to a more streamlined review process. And that means that weapons exports get there substantially faster. If a weapons export is intended for one of these designated open policy countries, the typical standard for the timeline of that export is about 1/4 of the time for exports to countries that are not on the open policy list. So what we're proposing to do, the effect of this amendment would be to add Ukraine, an important ally, fighting an existential struggle for its survival, to add it to that open policy list of countries, so that weapons would get to Ukraine faster. I've been surprised before, but I don't see why anybody would have a reason to oppose this amendment to remove red tape and streamline and speed up the process of allowing essential munitions to get into the hands of Ukrainian soldiers. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Okay, I will now do my ruling. Amendment CPC 5, again, seeks to amend Section 7.1 of the Export and Imports Permit Act. As our House of Commons Procedure and Practice 3rd edition states on page 771, an amendment is inadmissible if it proposes to sorry, excuse me. An amendment is inadmissible if it proposes to amend a statute that is not before the committee or a section of the parent act, unless the latter is specifically amended by a clause of the bill. Since Section 7.1 of the Export and Import Permits Act is not being amended by Bill C-57, it is therefore my opinion that the amendment is inadmissible.
I'll challenge the chair.
Right. Madam Clerk?
Shall the chair's ruling be sustained? Mr. Arya?
Yes.
Madame Fortier? Oui. Mr. Miao?
Yes.
Mr. Sidhu? Yes. Mr. Sheehan?
Yes.
Mr. Baldinelli?
No.
Mr. Genuis?
No.
Monsieur Martel?
No.
Mr. Seaback?
No.
Monsieur Savard-Tremblay?
Non, bien qu'opposé à la proposition.
Mr. Cannings?
Yes.
Yeas pour 6, nays contre 5.
Thank you. All right. We are now on to CPC 6. If there is a member that wants to move it, Mr. Jenius.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We are concerned, based on reports we hear, that that there has been a lack of interest from EDC and BDC in supporting investments that build up weapons manufacturing capacity in key partners where such investments would be appropriate and aligned with the national interests of Canada and the vital strategic interests of the countries in question. So we're proposing an amendment to the Export Development Act designed to facilitate the building up of Ukraine's domestic munitions manufacturing capacity. So the amendment is as follows. In carrying out its purpose, under paragraph 1C, the corporation shall give preference to the development of munitions manufacturing capacity in Ukraine. I think that's fairly straightforward. Again, we want to see EDC and BDC, and we'll have a separate amendment on BDC. We want to see EDC and BDC be able to look at and consider and move forward with investments supporting investments that make sense that would build up the munitions manufacturing capacity of Ukraine, so that it's able to have a secure, domestically sourced supply of the munitions it needs to be able to sustain its struggle for as long as required and liberate its territory and its people. I hope this amendment will find support. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. All right, Amendment CPC 6 seeks to amend Section 10 of the Export Development Act. As the House of Commons Procedure and Practice 3rd edition states on page 771, an amendment is inadmissible if it proposes to amend a statute that is not before the committee or a section of the parent act, unless the latter is specifically amended by a clause of the bill. Since Section 10 of the Export Development Act is not being amended by Bill C-57, it is therefore my opinion that the amendment is inadmissible.
I'll challenge the chair.
Madam Clerk?
Shall the ruling of the chair be sustained? Mr. Arya?
Yes.
Madame Fortier?
Oui.
Mr. Miao?
Yes.
Mr. Sidhu?
Yes.
Mr. Sheehan?
Yes.
Mr. Baldinelli?
No.
Mr. Genuis?
No.
Monsieur Martel?
No.
Mr. Seebeck?
No.
Monsieur Savard-Tremblay?
Nope.
Mr. Cannings?
Yes.
Yeas pour 6, nays contre 5.
Does not carry. There are no amendments submitted to clauses 17 to 33. Do I have unanimous consent to group them for the vote? Yes.
Je demanderais un vote par appel nominal.
I would ask for a recorded vote for clause 27, please.
We have unanimous consent to go from clauses 17 to 26. Everybody's in agreement with that? Okay, Care. 26. We'll deal with that separately.
Right now, we're going to vote on, we're going to do on division up till 26, right?
Okay.
So shall clauses 10
Shall clauses 17 to 25. 26. 17 to 26 carry.
On division.
On division. Okay. So, and shall clause 27 carry?
Je demanderais un vote par appel nominal sur celui-ci.
I would like a recorded vote for 27.
Vote on clause 27.
I'd like an explanation from our officials on clause 27, if we could.
Yes, I'm happy to provide one. Thank you. Clause 27 lists what's the Commercial Arbitration Act, which reflects the International Commercial Arbitration Code and implements it into Canadian, domestic Canadian legislation. By including arbitration provisions within the Canada-Ukraine Free Trade Agreement and listing it into the Commercial Arbitration Act, It allows for the judicial review and enforcement of arbitral decisions taken underneath the Canada-Ukraine Free Trade Agreement. I should note, though, that the listing provided is inclusive, meaning even if the Canada-Ukraine Free Trade Agreement were not listed, arbitration decisions taken under its provisions would still be captured by the Commercial Arbitration Act. Hope that's helpful.
All right. We've asked for a recorded vote on Clause 27. All those in favor of Clause 27? Right.
Mr. Arya?
Yes.
Madame Fortier? Mr. Miao?
Yes.
Mr. Sidhu?
Yes.
Mr. Sheehan?
Yes.
Mr. Baldinelli?
Oui.
Mr. Generous?
Yes.
Monsieur Martel?
Yes.
Mr. Seebeck?
Yes.
Monsieur Savard-Tremblay?
No.
Mr. Kennings?
No.
Yeas pour 8, nays contre 2.
Okay. So Clause 27 carries. All right. Do we have unanimous consent for Clause 28 to 33? On division? Okay. All right, we have a new Clause 33.1, CPC 7. Is there a member that would like to move it?
Madam Chair. I'm warning members, this is their last chance to support one of my amendments. So if they were planning on supporting one of them, this is it. This is the time. This is the time. Mr. Gerritsen, if you wish to support, you can maybe consult with your whip to sub in. I'm sure. Anyways, I won't go any further down that rabbit hole. Madam Chair, the amendment that I'd like to put forward is effectively the same as the previous amendment, except in this case applying it to BDC instead of EDC. This is to support BDC in making investments that would help develop domestic munitions manufacturing capacity in Ukraine. I think this is these changes are substantial and important, and I hope that members will, at this yet late stage, have a clarification of conscience, do the right thing, and support one of the many amendments that I've put forward aimed at facilitating weapons export and manufacturing in Ukraine. As we've said previously, what Ukraine needs most is not a carbon tax. I would say Ukraine doesn't need a carbon tax at all. What Ukraine needs is not provisions on carbon leakage that would effectively create the mechanism by which there could be pressure to further increase that. But rather, what Ukraine needs is the munitions and the support to prosecute this war and to achieve a decisive victory. And this is why we have put forward a series of amendments that, if adopted, would have significantly improved the process involved in munitions exports and supporting investments in munitions in Ukraine. And I, in all seriousness, do hope that rather than just vote against these measures, that Liberals and New Democrats will take a serious look at what is required to support our partners and allies in Ukraine and support this amendment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate you not going on too terribly long. But in spite of that, Amendment CPC-7 seeks to amend Section 4 and Paragraph 14.5.b of the Business Development Bank of Canada Act. And as to the House of Commons procedure and practice, third edition states on page 771, an amendment is inadmissible if it proposes to amend a statute that is not before the committee or a section of the parent act, unless the latter is specifically amended by a clause of the bill. Since Section 4 and paragraph 14.5.b of the Business Development Bank of Canada Act are not being amended by Bill C-57, it is therefore my opinion that the amendment is inadmissible. Right?
I will challenge the chair.
Okay.
Shall the ruling of the chair be sustained? Mr. Arya?
Yes.
Madame Fortier? Oui. Mr. Miao? Mr. Sidhu?
Yes.
Mr. Sheehan?
Yes.
Mr. Baldinelli?
No.
Mr. Generous?
No.
Mr. Martin?
No.
Mr. Seaback?
No.
Monsieur Savard-Tremblay?
No.
Mr. Cannings?
Yes.
Yeas pour 6, nays contre 5.
Very much. All right, now we have the last few clauses of the bill. There are no further amendments submitted to clauses,
I've submitted an amendment to the clerk for
To-
clause 40.
for clauses 40. So let's do 34 to 39. Right, there's no amendments to clauses 34 to 39. Do we have unanimous consent to group them for that vote? We do. Okay, they're carried on division. All right, now,
You may want to suspend briefly so that we can...
momentarily, so we can distribute the amendment. Okay, move suspension. to speak to Clause 40?
Yes, yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to move an amendment to Clause 40 by adding at the end the following. So the section reads now, subject to subsection 2, this act comes into force on a day to be fixed by order of the governor in council. And I will now add, after all references to carbon pricing and carbon leakage have been removed from the modernized Canada-Ukraine Free Trade Agreement.
Mr. Savard-Tremblay, do you not have?
Oui, la motion.
Where's the motion?
Par courriel?
Did we get it by email?
It would be helpful if we always had them in paper copy for some of us. I'm sure next time you will. You're okay?
J'avais pas eu de notif. Pour ça, je
Sometimes,
viens.
sometimes you beg forgiveness.
Oh, that's okay. All right, back to Mr. Seaback.
Yes, okay, so I'll start again. So this is an amendment to Section 40. The section currently reads, subject to subsection 2, this act comes into force on a day to be fixed by order of the governor in council, to which my amendment would add, after all references to carbon pricing and carbon leakage have been removed from the modernized Canada-Ukraine Free Trade Agreement. What we've heard, what we know is that carbon pricing, carbon taxes in Canada have caused enormous misery for Canadians. We have seen just recently 800,000 Ontarians are now going to the food bank as a result of the carbon tax causing massive increases in food prices, food inflation. Canadians are suffering deeply as a result of a carbon tax here in Canada. We do not know why carbon pricing and carbon leakage was included for the first time ever in a Canadian free trade agreement, not in a single free trade agreement that Canada has. It's not in our free trade agreement with the United States, not in CPTPP. It's not in free trade with the European Union. I've also been advised that any attempts to include this kind of language with countries we're currently negotiating with, for example, with Indonesia and others, it's a non-starter. It's not happening. This is something that the Prime Minister has asked to be included in this trade agreement as he pursues his ideological agenda on carbon pricing, carbon taxes, and carbon leakage, which is doing long-time damage, long-standing damage to the Canadian economy and to Canadians. So Liberals say that they want unity on this, and if this amendment were to pass and these references were removed, they would actually have unanimous support for this free trade agreement. Our objection is to putting kinds of things into free trade agreements that should not be there, that have never been there, and actually cause harm, not good. We've tried to improve the free trade agreement by adding sections on munitions productions, energy security, etc., and this would complete what should be done, which is by removing that. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you for introducing that. So my ruling on your amendment to Clause 40. Your amendment attempts to add a condition regarding when the bill comes into force. As House of Commons Procedure and Practice, 3rd edition, states on pages 773 and 774, an amendment intended to alter the coming into force clause of a bill, making it conditional, is out of order since it exceeds the scope of the bill and attempts to introduce a new question into it. It is in my opinion that the amendment is a new concept that is beyond the scope of the bill. Therefore, the amendment is inadmissible.
Madam Chair, not surprisingly, I'm going to challenge the Chair's ruling on that. I have a good feeling this time.
Avant le vote sur la...
Before voting on the challenge, Madam Chair, I haven't checked this myself, but if you could verify, how is it that during a previous agreement between Canada and Colombia, we were able to amend the entry into force date?
I've made the ruling that it is inadmissible, and the mover has asked for a recorded vote.
So shall the ruling of the chair be sustained? Mr. Arya?
Yes.
Madame Fortier?
Oui.
Mr. Miao?
Yes.
Mr. Sidhu?
Yes.
Mr. Sheehan?
Yep.
Mr. Baldinelli?
No.
Mr. Genuis?
No.
Monsieur Martel?
No.
Mr. Seebeck?
No.
Monsieur Savard-Tremblay?
Non, bien que je sois contre la proposition.
Mr. Cannings?
Yes.
Yeas pour 6, nays contre 5.
Thank you very much. All right, we have Clause 40. Okay, all those in favor of Clause 40 on division? Carries. All right. We'll see if we can get a little bit further here. Shall the short title carry? Yes, on division? Thank you. Shall the title carry? On division. Shall the bill carry? As amended? Carry? Yes.
No.
Okay, shall the bill as amended carry? Please, recorded vote.
Mr. Arya?
Yes.
Madame Fortier?
Oui.
Mr. Miao?
Yes.
Mr. Sidhu?
Yes.
Mr. Sheehan?
Yes.
Mr. Baldinelli?
No.
Mr. Genuis?
No.
Monsieur Martel?
No.
Mr. Seebeck?
No.
Monsieur Savard-Tremblay?
Oui.
Mr. Cannings?
Yes.
Yeas pour 7, nays contre 4.
Right. All right. Shall the chair report the bill as amended to the House? All right.
On division.
On division, all right. Anything else that I have to do? Order a reprint of the bill as amended for the use of the House at report stage. All right, all those in favor? Carried. Okay, Mr. Sheehan,
It's a new matter.
new matter? Okay, all right, so we've completed C-57. Thank you very much. In spite of all of the challenges, we've managed to get here, I think. Mr. Sheehan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have submitted to the clerk the following motion, which I will read, and it will be distributed in both official languages. Whereas Canada is not imposing a price on pollution on Ukraine, whereas Ukraine already has a carbon pricing system, whereas Ukraine is a sovereign nation and via President Zelensky has signed the modernized Canada-Ukraine Free Trade Agreement. Therefore, the Standing Committee on International Trade supports Bill C-57, the 2003 Canadian-Ukraine Free Trade Agreement Implementation Act. And, Madam Speaker, as I motivate this, I just wanted to draw to everyone's attention because there's been a lot said here that the Ukraine has had a price on pollution for well over a decade, since 2011. Ukraine is fighting this illegal, unjust invasion by Russia. It's fighting for their people today. They're fighting for their children for tomorrow. And at the same time, President Zelensky came here and signed this CAFTA agreement, which has a price on pollution, which fights climate change. It fights climate change today, and it fights climate change for the children of the Ukraine and for the children of the world. And Canada stands with Ukraine. Canada stands with Ukraine, and we ought to stand with them. And this is why this motion is tremendously important, to demonstrate and underline and highlight the importance of the fight against climate change. and
Point
the
of
fight
order,
against
Madam
Russia.
Chair.
I'm telling you that I don't know why
I have a
His
point of order.
Majesty's official opposition thinks they know
Point of
better
order.
than President Zelensky.
Thank you. On a point of order, yes, because I have Mr. Seebeck and Garrettson that
Yeah,
also
Madam-
want to speak.
Madam Chair, it's just a point of order. I commend the member on his dutiful adherence to his instructions from the Prime Minister's office, but is he actually proposing a motion that the committee agree with a thing it just did? Like, we just did clause by clause on the Canada-Ukraine free trade deal, and he's proposing, and it's passed, and now he's proposing a motion to say, let's also adopt a motion saying
Not a point
that
of
we
order.
agree
Not
with
a
the thing we
point of
just
order.
did.
This is
Is
debate.
that really,
This
is that
is
really
debate, Madam
what,
Chair.
what he's doing?
Be able to do that.
I've
It's just-
motivated
it's
this.
just absurd.
And it's on the
Like, it's just
floor.
absurd.
Open up a speakers list and we can debate this.
Thank you.
Oui, non, c'est juste, je sais qu'il a le droit, mais
I know he is allowed to do that. But since this discussion might take us to the end of our meeting time, I also have a motion.
I'm going to go to hopefully Mr. Seaback and Mr. Garrettson, and at that point, I hope we close off this discussion and can find time to deal with Mr. Savard Tremblay's motion that he wants to speak to. So, Mr. Seaback.
So thank you, Madam Chair. What I think is particularly contemptible is attempts by Liberal members and this Liberal government to say that His Majesty's loyal opposition, who by opposing things, it is an act of loyalty. If we see something bad in a particular piece of legislation, which we do in this legislation, and what my friend probably doesn't understand is what the effect of carbon leakage is. So carbon leakage would mean that Ukraine could not have a carbon tax or a carbon price so low as to attract investment, because that's considered carbon leakage, a company choosing to invest in Ukraine because their carbon tax or carbon price is too low. That's how it's defined. Now, actually, if Ukraine wanted to, and so what Ukraine has is a tiny carbon price on select industries. They do not have a broad-based carbon tax like the punishing carbon tax that this Prime Minister has imposed on Canada, a carbon tax he intends to quadruple as 800,000 Ontarians go to a food bank. It would be the fourth largest city in Ontario, a city entirely dependent on going to a food bank for food. That's what carbon taxes do, Madam Chair. That's what they're doing to Canada. And these Liberal members suggest that our objection to that is somehow not supporting Ukraine. Quite frankly, it's despicable, because this Liberal government granted a waiver, an export permit waiver, for a gas turbine to be exported to use to pump Russian gas. Let that sink in for a minute, everyone. And to the folks in the media who are here today, you should report on this. They allowed a gas turbine to go to help pump Russian gas. What does Russia use to fund its illegal war in Ukraine? The sale of gas and the profits from the sale of gas. They granted the permit. And they have the audacity to sit here and say that somehow us voting against this agreement that is now passed out of committee is somehow betraying Ukraine. No, giving them a gas turbine, giving Russia a gas turbine betrayed Ukraine. And you know what's worse? We now have a report that came out yesterday that Canadian detonators are being used in Russian landmines. That's right, they're so inept and incompetent in applying sanctions that Canadian detonators are finding their way into Russian landmines. Do you know what Russian landmines do? They kill Ukrainian soldiers. So if you want to talk about what's actually harming Ukraine, it's the incompetence of this government. Absolutely shameful, despicable incompetence. And then to try and come into the House of Commons and in committee to suggest that our vote, which did nothing, because guess what? It got to committee. Guess what? It just got out of committee, okay? It's causing no harm whatsoever. We get to oppose bad pieces of legislation. We get to oppose your ideological obsession with carbon taxes, carbon prices, and the misery they've imposed on Canadians. The absolute misery of Canadians. Canadians are skipping meals because of the carbon tax. Farmers are being beaten into submission because of the carbon tax. There are farmers who are paying $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 a month in carbon taxes. That gets passed on to Canadian consumers. So guess what? Our vote is not doing anything to harm Ukraine. We are principally opposed to you guys ramming in this terminology for the first time ever in a trade agreement That's what we object to, and we get to object to that. That does not cause a scintilla of harm to Ukraine. But you know what does? Giving them a bloody gas turbine and detonators used in landmines. You guys should all watch what you say, because your behavior on this is despicable and you don't have a leg to stand on. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Mr. Garrettson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, or Madam Chair. I mean, I think that, notwithstanding the fact that everything that Mr. Seaback just said about the price on pollution in Canada being patently incorrect, Conservatives' issue on the carbon tax is just another red herring. I mean, we've hit a new low when Conservatives are trying to avoid talking about emotion by starting to actually talk straight to reporters in a committee meeting, telling reporters what they should be reporting on. I mean, like, we've hit an absolute new low, because Conservatives are now in a position where they're having some serious buyer's remorse over the way that they voted about this. They have now voted not once, but twice against Ukraine. They just did it moments ago, these 4 members. And I would, as I was sitting here, Madam Speaker, because I had a lot of time to think about this. Thank you, Madam Chair. I had a lot of time to think about this during the last hour and a bit. And I was thinking to myself, Mr. Genius is talking quite a bit about, and all the Conservatives, about supporting Ukraine through providing weapons. It's funny, because in the 2022 budget, Madam Speaker, the Government of Canada put $500 million into supporting Ukraine with weapons. Every single Conservative member voted against it. Now, I know it's easy to say, well, it's the budget, we had to vote against it. And that kind of does make sense. I can understand that, so I can understand that. But you know what I did, Madam Speaker, in the time that I was sitting here? I went back and looked to see how Mr. Seaback, Mr. Genius, Mr. Baldellini, and Mr. Martel spoke on the budget of 2022. They all spoke to the budget. Well, I should put it this way. None of them spoke about the weapons that we were providing to Ukraine in the budget. So even if they had supported those weapons going to Ukraine that the government invested $500 million in the last budget, you would have thought that at least one of them, who are so passionate right now about the issue, would have stood up during that time, during the budget, and at least said, you know what? I don't support the budget because I can't, because I'm in the opposition, and that's just what we do. However, I do want to say that I do support the aid going to Ukraine. They didn't. And why didn't they, Madam Speaker? Because this issue right now of, we should be talking about ammunition and weapons, this issue right now is a red herring. That's it. They're looking for justification to prove to the over 2 million Ukrainian Canadians why they voted against it before and why they're doubling down on it now. I get a real kick out of it when I heard Mr. Genius earlier say, what Ukraine needs, ... Actually, what Ukraine needs is for Conservatives to start listening to their president when their president tells them, we need this trade agreement. What Ukraine needs is for Conservatives to listen to the Ukrainian Canadian Congress when they say what they need. What Ukraine doesn't need are people like Vladimir Putin or the Conservatives who tell them what they need. You know who else tells you?
Invited a Nazi
Point
of
order.
Point of order, Madam Chair.
Point of order.
Disgusting.
Point of order.
Mr. Garrettson has
Appel au règlement.
barely
Point of order.
talked about Ukraine
Point of order.
yourself in the
Okay,
House.
point of order.
Point
Mr.
of order.
Seaback.
Je l'ai souligné en premier.
Can't do anything about it.
There is-
J'ai
Point of order.
souligné l'appel au règlement en premier, Madame la Présidente.
I said point of order first, Madam Chair.
Who had the point of order?
I have a
I think it was
Just a
Mr.
partisan hack.
Sorry, it's what Mr. Seaback, and then Mr. Savard Tremblay.
Thank you. Madam Chair, right now in the House of Commons, the Speaker. This is a point of order.
Specific, please.
Yes, I will. There is a point of order in the House of Commons about Liberals suggesting that somehow we are with Vladimir Putin because of how we're dealing with this. The member just implied again that Conservatives are with Vladimir Putin. This is absolutely unparliamentary. He should not be making those references because absolutely no Conservative supports Vladimir Putin. It's a disgusting reference, and he should withdraw any comments like that. Thank you, Madam Chair.
So if I
Just one second.
on the
I
same
have
point of
Mr.
order.
Savard
Oui, écoutez,
Tremblay
c'est sur
on a
un-
point of order, sir.
Oui, c'est sur un tout autre sujet.
This is about a different topic. I think we forgot to tell our officials that they can leave. The bill was adopted, and I don't think they need to be here for the show, so I think we should thank them for their time.
Great. Thank you so much. To the officials, thank you for your patience. Thank you for being with us today, and you are free to leave if you choose. Mr. Garrettson, would you please?
Thank you. With apologies, thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to say on behalf of my wonderful colleagues here at the Public Service, we are very happy to provide any support to the committee. We thank you for having us here today, and we wish you well.
Thank you all for being here. Mr. Garrettson, you still have the floor. Please
Thank you.
finish
And
up.
Madam Speaker, Madam Chair, I never
have to
said,
let him- oh.
I never said that that conservatives support Vladimir Putin. I never said that. Like, I realize that there is, some real concern over the way that things look for conservatives. But what I said, Madam Speaker, is I said, what Ukraine doesn't need are people that are telling them what they need. And one of those people is Vladimir Putin, who we know continually tells them what we need. And we know that conservatives also do that. And I'm not coming to this conclusion on my own. I'm literally quoting the words that Mr. Genius used in this meeting about an hour ago. He said, quote, what Ukraine needs, ... and then went on. So Madam Speaker, I don't think
Point of
that
order,
President
Madam Chair.
Mr. Garrison, if you could wrap up.
Yeah.
I have several speakers after you, and we have a motion from one of the members that we'd like to deal with, which is time sensitive. So if you could just wrap up, sir.
I had a point of order,
I'm
Madam
going to try
Chair.
to wrap up,
can
but I
raise
do have a
points of
couple more
order.
things to
You
say,
gotta
Madam
let me
Chair,
raise
and I
points.
appreciate that.
Okay.
And to my point, what I was saying is that
I have a point of
what
order.
Ukraine doesn't
Okay,
need are people to tell them what they need. They're very capable
I
of
have a point
determining
of
that
order.
on their own, which
I'm
we've
going
seen.
to go to,
No.
I'm sorry, there's another point of order.
Yeah. Madam Chair, the member is just being completely dishonest about what I said, and he's misleading the committee. So I want to clarify what I said, which was that precisely that what Ukraine has said it needs is weapons. I don't think anybody disputes that Ukraine wants weapons. I am,
part of the
I am
debate. I'm
repeating what
sorry,
Ukraine has
Mr.
said it needs.
I think it's just
So,
more
the-
of the debate. Would you please complete your
member is
comments?
highly
Because I have to
dishonest
go
in
to
everything
Mr.
he's saying.
Sheehan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So to this motion, what it reads is whereas Canada is not imposing a price on pollution on Ukraine. That is very clear. In the bill that you, or in the agreement that you just sent back to committee, it specifically states that that's the case. It says, whereas Ukraine already has a carbon pricing system. Again, totally true. You can debate how much it is and where it is, as the Conservatives want to do, but it doesn't change the fact that that's a true statement. And then it says, whereas Ukraine is a sovereign nation and via President Zelensky has asked the modernized Canada Free Trade Agreement, again, another very true statement. Nobody can argue that that's not true, despite the fact that you might think that you know better than President Zelensky what he needs for his country. And then it finally says, therefore, the Standing Committee on International Trade supports Bill C-57, the 2023 Canada-Ukraine Free Trade Agreement Implementation Act. It's very simple. If you want to vote against it, but it's as cut and dry as that.
Mr. Sheehan. Okay, next I have Mr. Genius, and then I have Mr. Seaback.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to read briefly, for the interest of the committee, an article from July 12th of 2022. The headline is, quote, manifestation of weakness, end quote. Zelensky condemns Canada for return of Russia-Germany pipeline turbines. Yep. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is personally condemning Canada over its decision to grant a Canadian company a quote, time-limited and revocable permit allowing them to return turbines from a Russian pipeline that supplies natural gas to Germany. Zelensky said that Canada's decision is about more than wrongly deciding to hand over the turbines, but that it was an absolutely unacceptable exception to the sanctions regime against Russia. If a terrorist state can squeeze out such an exception to sanctions, what exceptions will it want tomorrow or the day after tomorrow? This question is very dangerous, Zelensky said in a video and accompanying statement on Monday. that also stated that the Ukrainian Ministry of Foreign Affairs had summoned Canada's representative to our country. The decision on the exception to sanctions will be perceived in Moscow exclusively as a manifestation of weakness. This is their logic. And now there can be no doubt that Russia will try not just to limit as much as possible, but to completely shut down the supply of gas to Europe at the most acute moment, he continued. The turbines, part of the Nord Stream 1 pipeline, had been sent to Siemens Canada in Montreal for repairs, but once the federal government imposed sanctions on Russian state-owned energy company Gazprom, the company was restricted from sending the equipment back. Canada faced pressure from both Russia and Germany to return the turbines, fearing the risk of further energy instability. Natural Resources Minister Jonathan Wilkinson's weekend announcement of the permit, and the story goes on with further details. Madam Chair, I will come to a close at the time of my choosing, as per the rules of the committee. Where was the member for Kingston and the Islands? Where was Mark Gerritsen when the Canadian representative in Ukraine was summoned by President Zelensky? Did Mr. Gerritsen take to Twitter? Did he stand up in the House of Commons to tell his government to listen to President Zelensky? No. No, he was silent. Where were the other members of this committee? Where was Yvonne Baker? Not a single member of the Liberal caucus criticized the Prime Minister's decision to supply a turbine which was designed to facilitate the export of Russian gas to Europe and give and a sanctions exemption. This was condemned roundly, personally, by President Zelensky. He described it correctly as a manifestation of weakness, and he summoned the Canadian representative to Ukraine. We had the ambassador to Ukraine before the Foreign Affairs Committee denouncing that decision as it related to the turbine. This wasn't the first or the last time that this government ignored the needs of Ukraine. Not what I say Ukraine needed, but what the Ukrainians said they needed. It wasn't the first time, and it would not be the last. On March 29th, earlier that year, very shortly after the invasion, Conservatives put forward a motion in the House to allow visa-free travel for Ukrainians fleeing the war. This motion, by the way, was supported by all of the opposition parties, Conservative, Bloc, and NDP. That meant it passed. So the House of Commons passed a motion calling on the government to allow visa-free travel for Ukrainians. The Liberals not only voted against it, but they failed to implement it, even after the express will of the majority of the House of Commons was decisively stated on that. Mr. Gerritsen is here. How did Mr. Gerritsen vote? He voted no. A month after the invasion, he voted against our motion for visa-free travel for Ukraine. All of the Liberal members either voted against or they didn't bother to show up for that vote. So we had the refusal of that support from this government, a refusal to implement the will of Canada's elected House of Commons. We had in the summer the government denounced and condemned by the President of Ukraine for breaking Western sanctions unity, and no statements whatsoever from backbench or otherwise members of the government. And no surprise, because while members of this government across the way are interested in trying to use something for political points, they have consistently voted against our proposals that would have made a concrete difference to help Ukraine. Just last week, at this committee, Conservatives put forward a motion which would have expanded the scope of Bill C-57 that would have allowed us to move forward with constructive amendments that would remove red tape and ease the process of weapon sales to Ukraine. Liberals opposed that motion. Liberals and New Democrats, unfortunately, together blocked our efforts to expand the scope of the bill. That would have made a real concrete difference to people in Ukraine. Now, the member across the way as well says, let's look at who's talking about Ukraine in the House. Okay, let's look at who's talking about Ukraine in the House. You know, I did a search here on who's talking about Ukraine. Actually, since getting elected, I have talked about Ukraine 240 times in the House of Commons, which is well over 3 times as much as the member for Kingston the Island talks about Ukraine. And I suspect that most of that talk has just been in the last week or so, when he's decided he wants to wear this attack of being the one doing attacks. I don't think the government has much to offer, which is why they've gone into full-on mindless attack mode. And I don't think Canadians are going to be fooled by that. You know, going back further, frankly, the Ukraine was invaded in 2014, right? And Stephen Harper led the world in mobilizing a response. And at that time, I think it was widely recognized the role that Canada was playing in response to the illegal invasion of Crimea. When Liberals took power, they were bent on warming up relations with Russia. While Ukraine was already partially occupied by Russia, we had then Minister Stéphane Dion eagerly pursuing the warming up of relations. In fact, one of the first things this government did is they canceled the sharing of RadarSat satellite images. Under Conservatives, we had RadarSat satellites that were sharing images that were of strategic use to Ukraine. And the Liberals, upon taking office, canceled that program of assistance. Now, prior to the further invasion at the beginning of last year, we were consistently calling for tougher sanctions. We've also called for increased investments in our military. Liberals, from the beginning of being in government, they were talking about having a leaner military in their first budget. Liberals have consistently failed to support Ukraine. They've consistently opposed the vital investments in our military and in NATO cooperation that would ensure our security and the security of our allies. They voted against visa-free travel for Ukraine. They earned the condemnation of the government of Ukraine by granting the Siemens turbine sanctions permit exemption. And they opposed our efforts to allow weapons exports. Now, as I said before, I think reasonable people can disagree on the particulars of a trade agreement. Our view is that the explicit references to carbon pricing and carbon leakage are enough of a problem that we cannot support the deal as it is. I think reasonable people can disagree about that. But what is clear is that on much more fundamental issues, issues on which the Ukrainian government has repeatedly and explicitly spoken, these Liberals have been totally indifferent. And their use of this issue for political purposes demonstrates their insincerity, their fundamental insincerity when it comes to Ukraine and when it comes to issues of international peace and security in general. With that in mind, Madam Chair, I will likely have a couple amendments to propose to this motion, but I will start with the following amendment and add to the beginning of the text of the motion, whereas on March 29th, 2022, Liberals opposed a Conservative motion to allow Ukrainians visa-free travel to Canada. And I'll leave it there.
Mr. Seebeck.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So,
Are you speaking to the amendment that Mr. Genius moved?
I'm speaking to the main motion.
You're speaking.
So Mr. Genius has just moved an amendment, so now
So right now we're debating the amendment. Mr. Garrettson?
Can we just get a copy of that? I don't, like, is it in writing or?
Yes, in both official languages, please.
Madam Chair, the rules do permit me to move an amendment verbally. I do not have it in writing in both official languages because I became aware of this motion when it was moved about 15 minutes ago.
Can you repeat it
the
slowly?
former minister, as well as the parliamentary secretary, should be aware of the rules, and the motion and the amendment has been duly moved.
You can introduce it.
Great. It's introduced.
All I asked, I didn't ask for it in both official languages. I just asked for the motion so I could read it, so I could understand it before I vote on it.
And we have them in writing. But if you would say it, read out your amendment slowly so that the translators can get it effectively. Okay, go ahead.
Oui,
Jen.
et si vous voudrez faciliter.
Yes, and if you want to facilitate the participation of both official languages, you can give a translation.
Right. The motion is whereas on March 29th, 2022, Liberals opposed, whereas on March 29th, 2022, Liberals opposed a conservative motion to allow Ukrainians visa-free travel to Canada.
Mr. Garrettson, to the
Well,
amendment.
To the amendment, I think that the amendment, I mean, I don't even think that it's in order, as it doesn't even reflect the motion, the original motion that was proposed. If if the Conservatives want to litigate this particular red herring that they're bringing up right now, then they can do that on their own at a later point. But the motion does not lend itself in any way, shape, or form to the amendment to the motion that's at hand. So I'll vote against it. If they want to bring forward another thing to discuss their red herring at another time, they can do that.
Okay. All right. I suggest that we call a vote.
On the amendment.
Uh,
I want to speak to the amendment again.
Well, you spoke to it already.
Well, I want to speak to it again. The rules provide me with the ability to do that.
Yeah, okay, keep it up. I mean, 2 o'clock's question period, keep going, I'm fine.
That's fine. Yeah. Madam Chair, the problem I have, the member seems to think that this amendment is outside the purpose of the motion. I'm not actually clear what the purpose of this motion is, because as I said previously, this committee has.
Madam Chair, point of order.
Yes, Mr. Chandra?
Madam Chair, I have other things to attend after 1. Is 1 now.
Yeah, I'm hearing from 2 committee members that they have to leave shortly. So if we want to try to wrap this up and bring it to a vote, I would suggest that would be appropriate, but you have the floor right now.
Yeah, Madam-
And then I have Mr. Seeback.
Madam Chair, I have the floor, and I do have more things to say on this matter, but if members, I don't want to stand in the way of, I think based on conversations with my colleague, there's another matter that the committee wanted to address before adjourning, so I will just move to adjourn debate on the present matter, if that facilitates the committee moving forward as it wishes. So I'll move to adjourn debate so that we can get to the other matter before the meeting is adjourned.
Okay, there is a suggestion that we adjourn this debate. Okay, now, all those in favor of adjourning the debate on the motion that was put forward, it would be on your amendment. So we're adjourning the debate on your amendment. It's adjourning the debate on the amendment that was introduced by Mr. Genius. Okay, all those in favor of adjourning the debate on the amendment that Mr. Genius? Okay, so the debate on the amendment is adjourned. We now have the motion that was.
No, point of order, Madam Chair. You cannot debate the motion if you've adjourned debate on an amendment. If you adjourn debate on an amendment, then you've adjourned debate on the matter, and the clerk can confirm that. No, the debate on that's been adjourned.
Bon, dans ce cas-là, est-ce que je peux demander l'ajournement?
In that case, can I also ask that we adjourn debate on the motion?
Separate things. They happen at once.
The clerk will confirm. We follow the rules. Is everyone in favor of adjourning? I'm not waiting for an answer. Is everyone in favor of adjourning the debate on the motion introduced by Mr. Sheehan? Is everyone okay
It's already
with
been
that?
done.
So that we can get on to the
It's
other
happened already.
members. Right, I'm trying to accommodate Mr. Savard Tremblay because he has a time-sensitive motion that he introduced a week ago. Mr. Savard Tremblay, you have the floor.
Merci. Alors, ben, écoutez, je ne ferai
Thank you. I won't waste any more of the committee's time. I think the motion is self-evident. It has to do with the budget presented in March 2023. The government was meant to table a bill to eliminate forced labor from Canadian supply chains and to strengthen the ban on the import of goods produced by forced labor. But there's only 3 weeks left before the House rises, and nothing has been tabled yet.
Madame Fortier.
Merci, Madame.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I am comfortable with most of this proposal, but it's the Minister of Labour, Seamus O'Regan, who is responsible for this, according to the mandate letter. So if you'd like, I can read it, but given the time constraints, I think you can just refer to the mandate letter. So I'd like to make a friendly amendment and move that the letter be sent to the Minister of Labour, Seamus O'Regan, rather than the Minister of Trade. Yes, rather than the Minister of Trade.
Okay, thank you very much.
Is there a decision on the motion?
Okay, all those in favor of Mr. Savard Tremblay's motion, please raise your hands. Okay, carries unanimously. All right, thank you all very much. Meeting adjourned.